If I were a rich man, all day long
Good evening and welcome. My name is Susan Kosherik and I'm the Reference and Adult Services Librarian at the Oregon Public Library, which is next door. Tonight we are here for Four Seasons Theater, The Stories of Fiddler on the Roof. This hour-long program features a quartet of some of the best local singers, bringing you the stories and songs of Fiddler. This program is produced by Four Seasons Theater as an outreach component of its 2016-17 season and draws on the work of Alyssa Solomon, author of Wonder of Wonders, A Cultural History of Fiddler on the Roof, which is available at libraries, so you can check that out if you'd like. For those in the audience who do like to sing, there will be an opportunity to join the performers in singing a familiar fiddler song. This Four Seasons Theater event is produced with support from Beyond the Page, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Madison Community Foundation. Beyond the Page is a permanent endowment held by the Madison Community Foundation that annually funds humanities programming for Dane County libraries forever. So, as I said earlier, please enjoy a snack from the table. We also have some information that Four Theater has put out, so feel free to read that. And on your seats there is a brochure about Fiddler on the Roof, as well as a comment card that we'd appreciate that you fill out, and information about some of the other humanities programs with our Beyond the Page Foundation grants throughout the libraries in Dane County. So I'll let Tamara take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you and good evening. My name is Tamara Broniano. I am proud to be the outreach coordinator for Four Seasons Theater. As you heard, Four Seasons Theater is the group that's producing this program this evening. We are now in our 12th season of bringing high-quality musical theater entertainment to Dane County audiences, and we're so grateful to the Beyond the Page program for sponsoring our outreach programs in area libraries. So, tonight, we look at Fiddler on the Roof, the stories of Sholem Aleichem that inspired the musical, and the stories of the creative team behind the Broadway show. Now first, just to kind of get this out of the way, how many of you are familiar with Fiddler on the Roof? Okay, even my daughter's raising her hand, so I know that everybody's familiar then if you know it, Carolyn. All right, so Fiddler on the Roof is a pretty well-known show. It opened on Broadway in 1964. It won 9 Tony Awards, and was the first show in Broadway history to run longer than 3,000 performances. It was sort of the first real mega hit on Broadway. The story of Fiddler follows Tevye the dairyman, his wife Golda, and his 5 daughters in turn-of-the-century Russian shtetl called Anatevka. Now the show on Broadway was created by a quintet of Jewish American men. Composer Jerry Bach, lyricist Sheldon Harnick, playwright Joseph Stein, director and choreographer Jerome Robbins, and producer Hal Prince. Now the trio of Bach, Harnick, and Stein, the composer, lyricist, and playwright, were the ones who conceived of creating a musical out of Sholem Aleichem's short stories. The stories they thought were so warm and emotional that they almost cried out to be musicalized. But Harnick recalls that there was something else driving them too. And that driving force is evident in one of the early proposed titles for the show, Where Papa Came From. The 3 men were very integrationist Jews, as many men were in the 1960s, focused on fitting into the mainstream. But yet, these stories held an appeal for the men. They weren't intent on making a Jewish musical, but the tales of this tightly knit Jewish shtetl community attracted them nonetheless. Director Jerome Robbins had very similar motivations. Robbins had largely shied away from his cultural heritage. He had changed his last name from Rabinowitz to Robbins, and he had embraced his image as a thoroughly American choreographer, traveling the world in a U.S. State Department-sponsored tour called Ballets USA. But he recalled with great affection and nostalgia a trip that he made as a young boy to visit his grandfather in a shtetl in Eastern Europe called Rozhanka. There, the 6-year-old Jerome Rabinowitz played in the dirt streets with the village children, fished in the nearby stream, and experienced a joy and ease that affected him deeply. As an adult, his Ballets USA tour took him close enough to Poland that he hired a driver to help him cross into Poland and try to find the shtetl that he remembered from his youth. But the Rożanka that he remembered was gone. The Jews from the village were relocated during World War II to a ghetto in a nearby town, and now Rożanka was just another Polish village, not the Jewish shtetl of his rose-colored memories. So as the creative team began to work on adapting these stories, Robbins continually pressed the trio of writers with a single question: what is the show about? Well, Bach, Harnick, and Stein thought the answer was obvious. It's about Tevye and his daughters that are getting married. It's about a man trying to eke out a living in a Russian shtetl at the turn of the century. But Robbins continually responded, no, that's no good. And he pressed them in meeting after meeting. What is the show about? The historian Elisa Solomon describes their collective aha moment like this. No one remembers who uttered the words that finally provided the answer to Robbins' persistent question, but they seemed to rearrange the molecules in the room. It's about the dissolution of a way of life. Robbins leaned forward. That's it. That's it, he said. It's tradition, he asserted. Yes, that's it. We have to establish the traditions at the beginning, and then the audience will see how they're breaking down. That's the show.
A Fiddler on the Roof. Sounds crazy, no? But in our little village of Anatevka, you might say every one of us is a fiddler on the roof trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. It isn't easy. You may ask, why do we stay up here if it's so dangerous? We stay because Anatevka is our home. And how do we keep our balance? That I can tell you in one word. Tradition! 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 Because of our traditions, we've kept our balance for many, many years. Here in Anatevka, we have traditions for everything. How to eat, how to sleep, how to wear clothes. For instance, we always keep our heads covered and always wear a little prayer shawl. This shows our constant devotion to God. You may ask, how did this tradition start? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it's a tradition. Because of our traditions, everyone knows who he is and what God expects him to do. Who day and night must scramble for a living, feed a wife and children, say his daily prayers, and who has the right, as master of the house, to have the final word at home. The Papa! The Papa! Tradition! The Papa! Tradition!
Who must know the way to make a proper home, a quiet home, a kosher home? Who must raise a family and run the home, so Papa's free to read the holy book?
The Mama! The Mama! Tradition! The Mama! The Mama! Tradition! At 3 I started Hebrew school, at 10 I learned a trade. I hear they picked a bride for me, I hope she's pretty. The sons, the sons. Tradition, the sons, the sons. Tradition. Tradition!
And who does Mama teach to mend and tend and fix, preparing me to marry whoever Papa picks?
The daughters, the daughters, I have 5 daughters!
Tradition!
The daughters, tradition! Who day and night must scramble for a living, feed a wife and children, say his daily prayers, and finish as the right as master of the house to have a final word at home. The papa, tradition, the papa, tradition.
So the story of Fiddler on the Roof begins, of course, with Sholem Aleichem. Sholem Aleichem is the pen name of Sholem Rabinowitz, an educated, urbane, Russian Jewish businessman who is first introduced to American audiences as the Yiddish Mark Twain. The writer's pen name is a kind of a who's on first play on words. Sholem Aleichem is a Yiddish greeting. It's the literal translation is peace be with you, but it's a phrase that you use in conversation as a greeting. How do you do? Sholem Aleichem. Rabinowitz and other Jewish intellectuals in Russia championed the Yiddish language and the stories of the shtetl as a response to the anti-Semitic violence of the time, the pogroms. Sholem Aleichem introduced the character of Tevye the dairyman in a short story in 1894, and he added to Tevye's tales in Yiddish periodicals over the next 20 years. The Tevye stories are told as a dialogue between Tevye and his silent friend, the writer, Sholem Aleichem. The creators of the Fiddler on the Roof musical attempted to retain some of this flavor by having Tevye occasionally address the audience directly, commenting on the action and reflecting on the choices that he must make, just as Tevye comments to Sholem Aleichem, and by extension the reader, in the original short stories. The scene that helps to establish Tevye's character was inspired by a Sholem Aleichem story that otherwise doesn't appear in the musical at all. A story called The Bubble Bursts, in which Tevye is swindled by a distant relative and loses his hard-earned savings. Before the money is lost, though, Tevye dreams of what his life might be like if his relative's promises of wealth come true.
This is an excerpt from the Sholem Aleichem story, The Bubble Bursts. When I was left alone, there began to pass in front of my eyes all sorts of visions. Visions so sweet that I wished they would never end. I saw a large house with a tin roof right in the middle of town, and inside the house were big rooms and little rooms and pantries full of good things. And around it was a yard full of chickens and ducks and geese. I saw the mistress of the house walking around jingling her keys. That was my wife, Golda. But what a different Golda from the one I knew. This one had the face and the manner of a rich man's wife, with a double chin and a neck hung with pearls. Oh, she strutted around like a peacock, giving herself airs, and yelling at the servant girls. Oh, and there were my daughters, dressed in their Sabbath best, lolling around, not lifting a finger for themselves. The house was full of brightness and cheer. Supper was cooking in the oven, the samovar boiled merrily on the table, and at the head of the table sat the master of the house, Tevye himself, in a robe and a skullcap, and around him sat the foremost householders of town. Oh, fawning on him, if you please, Reb Tevye. Oh, pardon me, Reb Tevye, and so on. What fiendish power money has. I exclaimed. "Whom are you cursing?" Golda asked. "Nobody. I was just thinking," I told her. "Daydreams and moonshine."
If I were a rich man, all day long I'd biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a biddy rich, idle man, I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. A fine tin roof and real wooden floors below. There would be one long staircase just going up, and one even longer coming down, and one more leading nowhere just for show. I'd fill my yard with chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks for the town to see and hear, squawking just as noisily as they can, and each loud would land like a trumpet on the ear, as if to say, here lives a wealthy man. If I were a rich man, all day long I'd biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a biddy rich, idle man, I see my wife, my Golda, looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin, supervising meals to her heart's delight. I see her putting on airs and strutting like a peacock. Oi, what a happy mood she's in, screaming at the servants day and night. The most important men in town will come to fawn on me. They would ask me to advise them, like Solomon the Wise. If you please, Red Tevye, pardon me, Red Tevye, posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eyes. Yada-dee, da-da-dee, da-da. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, they think you really know. If I were rich, I'd have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. And I'd discuss the holy books with the learned men 7 hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. Oh, if I were a rich man, all day long I'd biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, wouldn't have to work hard. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Ha!
script and the musical score existed as fully completed things before rehearsals began. But of course, with a new musical, that's almost never the case. The script and the score get tweaked as the creative team sees what works once the show is on its feet, and the reactions of preview audiences drive even more changes. Lyricist Sheldon Harnick's personal papers are stored in the Wisconsin State Historical Society. And in fact, if you have time after the program, we've got some reproductions of some of those papers in a display over to your right. His papers show that there were 29 songs, 29, that were written and discarded for Fiddler at some point during the process. The musical is a living, changing organism that grows and changes due to many different influences, other than just the playwright, the composer, and the lyricist. In particular, cast members can drive changes to the show and determine what that show will be. Producer Hal Prince had championed the comedic actor Zero Mostel to play Tevye in the show. And the casting of Mostel had an impact on the music that Tevye sang. Lyricist Sheldon Harnick recalls that the sounds of the chicks and the ducks and the geese that we heard just a moment ago were meant as a little avenue for Mostel, who is well known to improvise bits of shtick into his shows. And they were trying to sort of channel that impulse in that particular spot in the song. And when Harnick, who was worried about that song running a bit too long, proposed cutting the final verse, the verse about Tevye dreaming of sitting and reading the holy books and discussing the holy books with the learned men 7 hours every day, Mostel was the one to talk Harnick out of it. If you change that, Mostel protested, you don't understand this man. And Harnick later admitted, he saved me from myself. Now, other actors in the show also drove changes to the music. The original trio to introduce Tevye's 3 marriageable daughters, Seitel, Hadel, and Chava, was a song called To Marry for Love, which included the lyric, "Love doesn't put a turnip on the table." But Bach and Harnick replaced this song with this next lilting waltz that you'll hear, because while the actress cast as Hadel was a very skilled singer, the actresses cast as Seitel and Chava were not quite as skilled, and this trio proved easier than the original one for them to sing.
I wonder if Yenta found a husband for you.
I am not anxious for Yenta to find me a husband.
Not unless it's Mottel, the tailor.
Didn't ask you.
Tidal, you're the oldest. They have to make a match for you before they can make one for me.
And then after her, one for me.
So if Yenta brings
Oh, Yenta!
well, somebody has to arrange the matches. Young people can't decide these things for themselves.
She might bring someone wonderful.
Someone interesting.
And well off.
And important. Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Find me a find, catch me a catch. Matchmaker, matchmaker, look through your book and make me a perfect match.
Matchmaker, matchmaker, I'll bring the veil. You bring the groom, slender and pale. Bring me a ring, for I'm longing to be the envy of all I see.
For Papa, make him a scholar.
For Mama, make him rich as a king.
For me, well, I wouldn't holler if he were as handsome as anything. Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Find me a find, catch me a catch. Night after night in the dark I'm alone, so find me a match of my own.
Since when are you so interested in a match, Chava? I thought you just had your eye on your books. Oh, and you have your eye on the rabbi's son.
Why not? We only have one rabbi, and he only has one son. Why shouldn't I want the best?
Because you're a girl from a poor family. So whatever Yenta brings, you'll take, right?
Of course, right.
Huddle! Oh, Huddle! Have I made a match for you? He's handsome! He's young! he's a nice man, a good catch. True, I promise you'll be happy, and even if you're not, there's more to life than that. Don't ask me what. Oh. I found him! Will you be a lucky bride? He's handsome, he's tall, that is from side to side. But he's a nice man, a good catch, right? Right, you heard he has a temper, he'll beat you every night. But I'll be when he's sober, so you're alright. Did you think you'd get a prince? Well, I do the best I can. With no dowry, no money, no family background. Be glad you got a man.
Matchmaker, matchmaker, you know that I'm still very young. Please, take your time.
Up to this minute I misunderstood that I could get stuck for good. Dear Yenta, see that he's gentle. Remember, you were also a bride. It's not that I'm sentimental. It's just that I'm terrified. Matchmaker, matchmaker, plan me no plans. I'm in no rush. Maybe I've learned playing with matches, a girl can get burned. So bring me no ring, groom me no groom, find me no find, catch me no cash, unless he's a matchless match.
So Jerome Robbins was a brilliant choreographer and director, and he had already had a hand in lots of hit Broadway shows before Fiddler, shows like The King and I, Pajama Game, Gypsy, West Side Story, and Funny Girl. Now, Robbins was notoriously difficult in certain ways. He took an inordinate amount of time to cast his shows, and he could obsessively work and rework staging until the cast was nearly exhausted. But while Robbins could be difficult, he also took great care with his preparation for a show. For Fiddler, he worked with a Hasidic woman named Devorah Lapson to gain entry into the very insular world of the Hasidic community in Brooklyn. Lapson helped Robbins, Bach, Harnick, and Stein, basically everybody but Hal Prince on the team, into a celebration of the Jewish holiday Simchat Torah at a shtibel, a prayer house. Now, the men expected a solemn, sacred event, but what they found instead was much more raucous. The historian Elisa Solomon describes the scene for us like this. Dozens of men were crammed into the tiny shtibel, singing, clapping, knocking back schnapps after schnapps after schnapps. And their dancing came as a revelation. The secular showmen had expected gentle folk forms of, shimmy one way around the circle and then the other. But instead, they felt the room shake from floor stomping, body twisting, athletic flinging, and writhing. This was a holiday less for noshing than for moshing. Now, Lapson also worked with the creative team and some local caterers to sort of surreptitiously smuggle them into Hasidic wedding celebrations. At one of these celebrations, Robbins took particular note of a man who did something called a Flaschentanz, a trick where he danced around the room with a bottle on his head. And this image of the man dancing with a bottle on his head stayed with Robbins throughout the development of the show and finally found an outlet during previews in Washington, D.C. One morning, Robbins brought all the men of the chorus out into the carpeted lobby of the theater and said, "This is the dance that you're going to perform to entertain the bride and the groom at the wedding. Here we go." He showed the men the steps and then passed out yarmulkes and bottles and had the men try the moves again, only this time with the bottles aloft. The historian Solomon describes it for us. One by one, the bottles thudded onto the carpet. Robbins instructed the men to try again. And again. One dancer finally made his way through the sequence, but the movement looked so tentative and stiff that Robbins finally allowed the men to put on just regular hats. But he permitted no tricks, no holes cut into the crowns, no Velcro. He wanted the audience to feel the tension for the sheer theatrical thrill, as well as for the emotional echo of the precarious fiddler trying to scratch out a tune without breaking his neck. The dancers definitely felt it. All the men knew they would be dancing on a wooden stage, and that the choreography called for them to slide across the floor on their knees. Glass splinters were not an option. So within a few hours, the men learned the choreography. The new dance went into the show that night, and the audience exploded into applause at its conclusion. Now, Robbins wasn't the only one on the team trying to create a realistic picture of shtetl life. Zero Mostel, who created the role of Tevye, also worked toward this goal. Mostel grew up the son of Ashkenazi Jews in a household where Yiddish was regularly spoken, and he felt more conversant with the everyday rituals of Jewish life in Eastern Europe than did Robbins, with whom he regularly clashed. During an early staging rehearsal, Mostel touched the doorpost of Tevye's home and then brushed his lips with his fingers before entering. Well, Robbins told him to stop, but Mostel responded that he was kissing the mezuzah. This is a customary gesture of devotion that acknowledges the sacred parchment affixed to doorways of Jewish homes. Robbins wanted to cut the gesture, but Mostel kept defiantly doing it during rehearsals. Eventually, Robbins demanded that Mostel stop. And on the next run through the scene, Mostel crossed himself before entering the building instead. He made his point. Robbins let him keep the gesture in the show. Altogether, the creative team brought a realistic picture of Jewish shtetl life to the stage, introducing many people to the day-to-day rituals that gave life meaning in villages like Anatevka.
May the Lord protect and defend you. May He always shield you from shame. May you come to be in Israel a shining May you be like Ruth and like Esther. May you be deserving of praise. Strengthen them, O Lord, and keep them from the stranger's ways. May God bless you and grant you long May God make you good mothers, and may He send you husbands who will care for you. May the Lord protect and defend you. May the Lord preserve you from pain. Favor them, O Lord, with happiness and peace. Oh, hear our Sabbath prayer.
The trio of Bach, Harnick, and Stein originally chose 5 of the Sholem Aleichem short stories to form the spine of the musical. As they worked, though, they ended up dropping one of the stories, called Shrinza, about the 4th of Tevye's daughters, to keep the musical to a manageable length. And once Shrinza's story was dropped, the progression of the dissolution of Tevye's traditions became clear. One daughter marries without a matchmaker, one without permission, and one without a blessing. The first daughter to marry is Tzeitel, who falls in love with the tailor, Muttle Campsoil. In the story Modern Children, Tevye recounts how he met with the wealthy butcher Laser Wolf, thinking that they would discuss the sale of one of his dairy cows, only to realize midway through the discussion that they are actually discussing Laser Wolf's offer for Seitel's hand in marriage. Tevye agrees to the match, but later is surprised to find Seitel in tears over the news. The next day, he gets a visit from the tailor, Muttle Campsoil.
This is an excerpt from the story Modern Children. I heard someone call out, "Good evening, Reb Tevye." I looked up and saw a familiar face, Muttle Campsoil, a young tailor from Anatevka. Well, well, I say, you speak of the Messiah, and look who's here. And what brings you here all of a sudden? What brings me here, he answers, my 2 feet. And he sits down on the grass near me and looks off toward the barn where the girls are moving about with their pots and pitchers. I have been wanting to come here for a long time, Reb Tevye, he says at last. Only I never seem to have the time. All of us tailors have as much as we can do right now. It's been a summer of weddings. Everybody is marrying off his children. Everybody, I say. Everybody except Tevye. Maybe I am not so worthy in the eyes of the Lord. No, he answers quickly. You're mistaken, Reb Tevye. If you only wanted to, you could marry off one of your children too. It all depends on you. So, I ask, maybe you have a match for Seitel? A perfect fit, the tailor answers. And, I ask, is it a good match at least? Like a glove, he cries in his tailor's language. And you really think he's a good match? There never was such a match, he answers promptly. There are matches and matches, but this one, I want you to know, was made exactly to measure. And who, may I ask, is the man? Tell me. Who is it, he says? Why, me, myself. When he said that, I jumped up from the ground as if I had been scalded, and he jumped too, and there we stood, facing each other like bristling roosters. Either you're crazy, I say to him, or you're simply out of your mind. What are you, everything? The matchmaker, the bridegroom, the ushers, all rolled into one? I suppose you'll play the wedding march, too. I've never heard of such a thing, arranging a match for oneself. But he doesn't seem to listen. He goes right on talking. Anyone who thinks I'm crazy is crazy himself. No, Reb Tevye, I have all my wits about me. Here is the whole story. Your daughter Seitel and I gave each other our pledge more than a year ago now that we would marry. To make a long story short, he talked me into it. There was only one thing still bothering me, and that I still couldn't understand. What did they mean, pledging their troth? What kind of world has this become? A boy meets a girl and says to her, let's pledge our troth? Why, it's just too free and easy, that's all. But when I looked at this model standing there with his head bent like a sinner, and I thought, now what am I becoming so alarmed about? So maybe Muttle Campsoil is only a tailor, but at the same time, he is a good man, a worker. He'll be able to make a living. And besides, he's honest, too. So what have I got against him? You know what, Muttle? I say to the young tailor, you go home. I'll straighten out everything here. And tomorrow morning, if you haven't changed your mind by that time, maybe we'll see each other.
It was a miracle! Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, God took a Daniel once again, stood by his side, and miracle of miracles, walked him through the lion's den. Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, I was afraid that God would frown, but like he did so long ago in Jericho, God just made a wall fall down. When Moses softened Pharaoh's heart, that was a miracle. When God made the waters of the Red Sea part, that was a miracle too. But of all God's miracles, large and small, the most miraculous one of all is that out of a worthless lump of clay, God has made a man today. Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, God took a tailor by the hand, turned him around, and miracle of miracles, led him to the promised land. When David slew Goliath, yes, that was a miracle. When God gave us manna in the wilderness, that was a miracle too. But of all God's miracles, large and small, the most miraculous one of all is the one I thought could never be. God has given you to me.
When trying to find financial backers for the show, producer Hal Prince would have sample songs performed for them to sell them on the concept of the musical. And one of the songs that the backers really liked was a solo for Mottle the Tailor about his new sewing machine. When the show did its first round of previews at a theater in Detroit, though, Dear Sweet Sewing Machine was one of the first songs to go. It stopped the forward motion of the story, and it didn't seem to play very well with preview audiences. Luckily, Bach and Harnick had secretly been working on a new song for Mottle. Our historian Elisa Solomon describes the scene for us. Harnick credits two inspirations: a note that Robbins gave him and Bach in a meeting telling them that in response to winning Seitel, Mottle needed musically an outburst of exuberant happiness, and a line that playwright Joseph Stein had written for Mottle in that moment: "It's a miracle." Harnick fished in the nightstand of his hotel room for a Gideon Bible so that he could brush up on some godly interventions, and he churned out lyrics for Miracle of Miracles, fitting a pious young man with their references to David and Goliath, the wall in Jericho, manna in the wilderness. Bach set Harnick's words to buoyant music, and the songwriters rehearsed with the actor playing Mottle on the sly. During the second week in Washington, D.C., which was their second preview city, they presented the number to Robbins. Robbins vaulted onto the stage. "Fabulous," he cried. Problem solved. So, let's step back a moment and consider the team of composer Jerry Bach and lyricist Sheldon Harnick and how they worked. When they were first working on the project, they were in two different places. Bach was in New Rochelle, New York. Harnick was in Manhattan. They would meet together to discuss the show and the short story source material, and then they would go off on their own to work. Bach would sketch some tunes, musical guesses, he called them, and he would send them to Harnick on tape. Now, one of the tapes that Bach sent contained a plaintive waltz tune that Harnick really just seized on. And Harnick recalls that the words just came, they crystallized on this melody. Once Harnick completed the lyrics, he couldn't wait to share them with Bach, so he took the train up to New Rochelle and sang it for Bach in the basement, in his music studio in the basement of his home. And when they called Bach's wife down into the basement to listen to the song, she began to cry, and they knew that they had struck deep. And indeed they had. Many of you may remember that in the years immediately following Fiddler's debut on Broadway, you could not attend a wedding without hearing this next song. And if you are so inclined and if you'd like to sing, we would love to have you join us on this number on the final refrain. I'll give you a little high sign to let you know when to jump in.
I don't remember growing older. When did they?
When did she get to
must learn from one another, day by day.
They look so natural together, just like two newlyweds should be. Is there a canopy in store for me?
Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, swiftly fly the years, one season following another, laden with happiness and
So I'd like to take a moment at this point to introduce to you the wonderful performers that we've been enjoying this evening. Starting from the far right, Mr. Jace Nichols, Laura Christensen, Jordan Peterson, Erica Halverson, Leila Sonier on the violin, and Joy Bauman on the piano. So Seitel has married her tailor, Mottel, and now the second daughter, Huddle, has fallen in love with the young student and radical, Perchik. Her story is the second in the dissolution of Tevye's traditions, the daughter who marries without permission.
This is an excerpt from the Shalom Aleichem story, Huddle. And as I sit, thinking of Huddle, she comes out of the house and sits down near me on the stoop. She looks cautiously around, then whispers, "I have something to tell you, Father. I have to say goodbye to you, and I think it's for always." She spoke so softly that I could barely hear her, and she looked at me in a way that I shall never forget. "What do you mean, goodbye for always?" I say to her and turn my face aside. "I mean I am going away early tomorrow morning, and we shall possibly never see each other again." "Where are you going, if I may be so bold as to ask?" "I am going to him." "To him? And where is he?" "He is still serving, but soon they'll be sending him away." "And you're going there to say goodbye to him?" I ask, pretending not to understand. "No, I'm going to follow him," she says. "Over there." "There? Where is that? What do they call the place?" "We don't know the exact name of the place, but we know that it is far, terribly, terribly far." And she speaks, it seems to me, with great joy and pride, as though he had done something for which he deserved a medal. What can I say to her? Most fathers would scold a child for such talk, punish her, even beat her, maybe. But Tevye is not a fool. Shall I fall on her neck and plead with her not to go? I know it won't help. Those daughters of mine, when they fall in love with somebody, it is with their heads and hearts, their bodies and souls.
Distance
was Hal Prince's role on Fiddler? Well, a producer is responsible for getting financial backing, for ensuring that the show stays on budget and on schedule, and for keeping all the varied personalities of the creative team working in harmony. For Fiddler, Hal Prince was also a balance to director Jerome Robbins, whose nearly obsessive level of preparation made it hard to get him to commit to an actual start date for rehearsals. In his memoir, Hal Prince said, "Robbins would like the opening night reviews in his hands before he starts rehearsals. He's gun-shy. He's the fellow standing on the edge of a precipice. You, the producer, have to push him over." And Hal Prince was right. With the start date for rehearsals approaching quickly, Robbins was panicky and felt like he needed more time to prepare. So Robbins told Prince, through his lawyer, that he needed more time. Well, Prince sent Robbins a telegram saying, "Don't ever ask me to talk to your lawyer unless you never want to work with me again, love, Hal." Well, Robbins cabled back, "Then don't give me rehearsal dates via my assistant, love, Jerry." Well, Prince responded that Robbins could have more time, but only if he personally reimbursed Hal Prince for the $55,000 already paid out for the production costs. Well, Robbins caved and the rehearsal started on the planned date. Now, even though Robbins was difficult, he was also really great at fixing a show, at identifying what wasn't working and coming up with a way to fix it. During previews in Detroit, Robbins was frustrated by the second act. It lacked forward motion, he thought. Many of the plot points are rather depressing. And why didn't Golda and Tevye have anything to do in Act 2? So lyricist Sheldon Harnick had imagined that perhaps the marriages of his first two daughters might cause Tevye to rethink about his own marriage. But as much as he liked the idea, he couldn't figure out how to make it work. So Harnick took long walks through the streets of Detroit, trying to solve the puzzle of a second act song for Tevye and Golda. And finally, he came up with some lyrics and sent them to Bach, apologizing for the fact that they were more dialogue than lyrics. Well, Bach responded with a musical setting of those words that didn't change a single syllable. And out of character for Robbins, it took him only 15 minutes to stage this lovely duet between Tevye and Golda that gives the second act a little lift.
So, Hodel and Perchik. Well, I have decided to give them my permission to become engaged.
What? Just like this, without even
Who
asking.
asks you? I'm the father.
And who is he? A pauper. He has nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I wouldn't say that. I hear he has a rich uncle. A very rich uncle. He is a good man, Golda. I like him. He's a little crazy, but I like him. And what's more important, Hodel likes him. Hodel loves him. So what can we do? It's a new world. A new world. Love. Golda, do you love me?
Do I what?
Do you love me?
Do I love you? With our daughters getting married and this trouble in the town, you're upset, you're worn out, go inside, go lie down. Maybe it's indigestion.
Golda, I'm asking you a question. Do you love me?
You're a fool.
I know. But do you love me?
Do I love you? For 25 years I've washed your clothes, cooked your meals, cleaned your house, given you children, milked the cow. After 25 years, why talk about love right now?
Golda, the first time I met you was on our wedding day. I was scared.
I was shy.
I was nervous.
So was I.
But my father and my mother said we'd learn to love each other. And now I'm asking Golda, do you love me?
I'm your wife.
I know. But do you love me? Well?
For 25 years I've lived with him, fought with him, starved with him. 25 years my bed is his. If that's not love, what is?
Then you love me.
I suppose I do.
And I suppose I love you too. It doesn't change a thing, but even so, after 25 years, it's nice to know.
Of the three daughters' tales, the creative team struggled the most with the story of Chava, the third daughter, who falls in love with the Christian youth Fiedka and leaves her faith and her family to marry him. Her story went through several permutations. In the earliest version, she and Fiedka decide to emigrate with Tevye and the rest of the family when the villagers are forced to leave Anatevka. Later, Robbins created a dream ballet to show Tevye's response to Chava's elopement, a sort of a pantomime involving the full cast showing Tevye coming apart at the seams. In previews, though, the dream ballet just didn't work. Harnick remembers that when the ballet happened in Act 2, the show died. Robbins began to pare it back during previews, and audiences began to respond better. And in Detroit, composer Jerry Bach joked that if he takes it out altogether, it'll be a showstopper. And Bach was basically right. The dream ballet eventually came out, and Tevye's rejection of Chava became a much more abrupt and ultimately poignant moment.
This is an excerpt from the Sholem Aleichem story, Chava. When I got through with my customers, I set out for home with my empty milk cans. As I rode through the woods, I slackened the horse's reins, let him nibble at will. I let my thoughts roam at will also. Anything to drive my gloom away, and keep from thinking about Chava. But just as if to spite me, she kept creeping in among my thoughts. First, she appeared before me in her own image, tall, lovely, blooming, like a young tree. Then I saw her as a little baby, frail little nestling, snuggled in my arms. And for a moment I forgot what she had done to me, and my heart went out to her in longing. Then I remembered, and a great anger seized me. Why couldn't I forget her? Why couldn't I tear her out of my heart completely? Didn't she deserve to be forgotten? In the midst of these thoughts, I suddenly became aware that my horse had stopped. What's the matter? I lift up my eyes and look. It is she, Chava. My first impulse was to jump off the wagon and take her in my arms. But something held me back. She's looking at me wildly. Her face is deathly pale. And before I know what's happened, she's got the horse by the bridle and is saying to me, "Father, I would sooner die on the spot before I let you move another step. I beg you, Father, listen to me." So, I think to myself, you want to take me by force. No, my dear. If that's what you're trying to do, I see that you don't know your father very well. And I began whipping my horse with all my might. The horse obeys me, he leaps forward. Well, I don't want to drag out my story any longer, for time is valuable. All the rest of the way, as I drove, I thought I could hear her running after me, calling, "Listen, Father, listen to me." A thought crossed my mind. Tevye, you are taking too much upon yourself. Will it hurt you if you stop and listen to her? And peculiar thoughts came to my mind. Why did God create Jews and non-Jews? And since God did create Jews and non-Jews, why should they be segregated from each other and hate each other, as though one were created by God and the other were not? And in order to chase away these painful thoughts, I began to chant the words of the evening prayer. But what good was this chanting? Inside of me, a different tune was playing. Chava, it went. Chava.
Little bird, Little Chavela, I don't understand what's happening today. Everything is all a blur. All I can see is a happy child, the sweet little bird you were, Chavela, Chavela. Little bird, little Chavela, you were always such a pretty little thing, everybody's favorite child. Gentle and kind and affectionate, what a sweet little bird you were, Chavela, Chavela.
The show was one of the final things to gel during previews in Washington, D.C. The villagers' expulsion from the shtetl and the cast's exit one by one from the stage. Robbins had been working up a big Act 2 opening number, an up-tempo song called Anatevka, in which the villagers danced around with pots and pans. But even though he had worked on it with the cast for weeks, in the end he decided not to add it. The only remnant of that second act opener is the mournful reprise of the song at the end of the show, as the villagers are forced from their home, as Sholem Aleichem described in the story, Get Thee Out. In the years immediately after the show's premiere on Broadway, the show was produced internationally in over 24 countries, and people from many different cultures adopted the people of Anatevka. Playwright Joseph Stein loved to share that at the rehearsals in Tokyo that he attended, the local producer asked him how the show could have been such a hit in America when it was so Japanese. And Irish-American music arranger Bobby Dolan praised Robbins for expressing universality through particularity. For as he put it, these Jewish people are equally Irish. Hal Prince successfully rewarded the original financial backers of the show. Their investment returned a 352% profit. And today, even 50 years after the original premiere of that show, over 200 schools annually produce Fiddler on the Roof. It's a cornerstone of our Broadway canon. Well, we've reached the end of our program. We've got one more number to share with you, but before that, I want to take a moment to thank you all for joining us here this evening, and to thank the Oregon Public Library and the Beyond the Page program for sponsoring this program. As a representative of Four Seasons Theater, I want to let you know about a few upcoming Four Seasons Theater events. You can always learn more on our website. But coming up on February 24th, we have the next installment in our Cabaret at the Circle series. That's a cabaret, one-woman show downtown in the Play Circle space in the Memorial Union, featuring guest artist Jace Nichols on some of the elements of that program. And coming up this summer, the first weekend in August 4th through 6th, we'll be doing a production of Man of La Mancha in the large theater in the Memorial Union, the Wisconsin Union Theater. And we would love to have you in the audience for that show as well. So, we'd like to close our program with an uplifting song from Act 1 of Fiddler on the Roof.
To our prosperity, to good health and happiness, and most important, to life, l'chaim, 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 to life. Here's to the father I've tried to be.
Here's to my pride to be.
Drink l'chaim, to life, l'chaim, 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 to life.
Life has a way of confusing us, blessing and bruising us. Drink the high to life.
God would like us to be be joyful even when our hearts lie panting on the floor.
How much more can we be joyful when there's really something to be joyful for?
To us and our good fortune, be happy, be healthy, long life! And if our good fortune never comes, here's to whatever comes, drink Luchem to life!
If you are interested, we can have a short talk back after the program, and if you're interested as well, we've got the displays over there of the papers from Sheldon Harnick's papers in the Wisconsin Historical Society. And if you need to get scooting and you don't want to do the talk back, that is also fine. We appreciate your presence here tonight.
And the survey is double-sided. I'm going to pass some pencils around. So you can...
If I were a rich man,